I don't have to remind you how negative Americans are on their government here in Washington. Every measure we put in front of them comes back negative, negative, negative. 14% job approval rating for Congress, very low ratings of the federal government in general. We had a very low rating of satisfaction with the size and power of the federal government, and so on and so forth. So it is perhaps no surprise that we find Americans favoring some kinds of reforms that might change things here in Washington. For example, term limits. We just asked this question. If you could vote for it, would you vote for or against term limits on U.S. members of the House and the Senate? Look at the overwhelming majority who say yes. 75% of Americans say they would favor term limits for representatives here in Washington. Now, we looked at it by age. We looked at it by party. We really don't find a lot of difference here. The clear majority of all the groups say they would favor term limits. So that's one way Americans can express their disgust with what's happening in Washington. Now, on a slightly different note, we re-asked something that we've asked over the decades, and that has to do with a different type of election reform. That would be abolishing or doing away with the Electoral College. Now, this usually isn't an issue. For example, last November, President Obama won in both the popular vote and in the Electoral College. But we do have the example of 2000, not that long ago, when Al Gore actually won the popular vote. But George Bush won the Electoral College vote, and of course, by the terms of the Constitution, it's the Electoral College that counts, and that's why George W. Bush was made president. So we ask Americans, if you had your druthers, so to speak, would you vote to abolish the Electoral College and have the election of presidents just based on the popular vote? And the answer is yes. Well over 6 in 10 Americans say they would vote in favor of getting rid of the Electoral College. This sounds reasonable, but of course people in states like New Hampshire and Ohio and Iowa certainly wouldn't like it because all the campaigning is done in those states and it's a big boon to the economy. So when you change something, it always has implications, but at least in theory, as has been the case when we've asked this question decades previous, we find a majority of Americans, if it were up to them, would amend the Constitution and make the election of the president based on the national popular vote. That's an update for you. I'm Dr. Frank Newport, Gallup Editor-in-Chief.